Carl Edwards was the fiercest gladiator to enter the Bristol Motor Speedway, spending the week rigorously training by going on bike rides and by doing some heavy gym sessions. Carl Edwards was ready to dominate his 42 competitors and be greeted after the race to the roar of a crowd, celebrating them with his traditional backflip. However, the thousands of fans in the last great Coliseum would be stunned silent when Carl Edwards would have a major issue in this event. NRF Productions presents how Carl Edwards lost the 2013 Bristol Night Race. On a midsummer night in Bristol, Tennessee, the fans had camped out all weekend. They were anticipating an annual NASCAR tradition of running stock cars under the lights at Bristol Motor Speedway. For Carl Edwards and Jimmy Fennig, their bed was made. They were solid in the regular season to where they were over 100 points over the cut line. And due to a 122-lap domination in Phoenix, Carl Edwards had one win, which meant that he would have some bonus points entering the chase. For Carl Edwards and the 99 team, tonight was all about momentum and showing that they could be a championship contender, because you don't want to go into the chase not having any momentum unless you're Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus. They just seem to always go to the back and flip that Hendrick Motorsports switch, which just opens a brand new portal of race cars, notes, setups, to where just all of a sudden they go from struggling in the summer to champions in November. It's safe to say with 0 Cup championships, Carl Edwards hadn't reached that same amount of mastery, so for tonight, it was important to go out there and do well, especially at a racetrack where Carl Edwards was really good at. They called him Concrete Carl because he was really good at the high banks of the Bristol Motor Speedway. This included back-to-back victories in the Bristol Night Race in 2007, and he would run it back in 2008. As for the race itself, you had Alan Bestwick in the booth, and fun fact, on that exact day, he came across an interesting 12-year-old kid that was 2 years away from starting his own YouTube channel. So how does a NASCAR YouTuber interact with such a broadcasting legend? Well, the first thing I made sure to tell him was to be wary of all those goofy goobers in the NASCAR garage that are going to blacklist him. Then the second thing was I got a picture with him, got an autograph, which I unfortunately lost, but that's besides the point because Alan Bestwick, being such an iconic legend in NASCAR broadcasting, it was an honor to meet him on that day. So as Alan Bestwick would head to the booth and I would eventually head to the Peerless Woodworking Suite in between turns 3 and turns 4, the field would embark on a 500-lap journey to try to win the iconic Bristol Night Race. From the third starting position, Carl Edwards would unfortunately be stuck on the bottom to begin the race, and because of that he would end up slipping to 4th as Denny Hamlin would lead lap 1. Why was he in this position? Well, Bruton Smith decided if it ain't broke, we're going to get the demolition crew and add a brand new racing surface. Sure, you had guys like Dale Jarrett defend the new racing surface. Now that you had multiple grooves,
this offers better racing because it's up against the top, but you have the option to go to the middle and bottom and try to make that pass.
However, prior to the 2012 Bristol Night Race, there would be some track grinding to try to bring that old Bristol back, because there is nothing like the Bristol where Jeff Gordon would go up and bump and run Rusty Wallace out of the way. This was something that failed miserably because for the 2012 race, now everyone would start using the high line, and so because of that, passing seemed impossible unless you decided to ahead of your competitors like some other drivers would try throughout the night. Plus, you also had to take into account 2012 versus 2013. Obviously, there was the brand new Generation 6 car, and because of that, there was a new gear rule, especially compared to the spring and fall races, that would make a move extremely difficult. On lap 41, Ryan Truex, making his Cup debut, would end up having some issues, bringing out the first caution, and because of that, the strategy would be flipped on its head. For guys up front like Carl Edwards, it was easy. You pit here, take 4 tires, try to make some adjustments to make the car better. For someone like Jeff Gordon, who did not do a good job qualifying, Alan Gustafson decided to make a strategy call to have the 24 stay out and to try and avoid being in the calm of the storm like he was early on in the race. Carl Edwards would restart 4th and would benefit by being on that outside, eventually working his way to 2nd place. It was on this green flag run where we would start to see some contenders fade out of the picture, like Kurt Busch, who gave up the lead because he ultimately had a problem with his car. The right front was making a lot of noise. It was downright annoying for Kurt Busch, but for Carl Edwards, this was like music in his ears, as on lap 77, he had his first lead of the night. On lap 90, the number 35 would hit the wall, and so because of that, we got another round of pit stops. Even as the 99 team did a good job on pit road, they would lose the lead to Ryan Newman and the 39, taking 2 tires where Carl Edwards took 4. Well, if that wasn't enough, there would be just a brand new Pandora's box of contenders that would be launched onto this race, as Dale Earnhardt Jr., Bobby Labonte, Clint Bowyer, Juan Pablo Montoya, and Greg Biffle would all stay out. They would have the track position, and now Carl Edwards, the guy that led 16 laps on the previous run, would restart in 10th. This green flag run would be chaos, as the 18 was out on older tires, really struggled, and would ultimately go up the racetrack, which was to the detriment of Joey Logano fighting to keep his season alive. Meanwhile, on the next restart, Danica Patrick, who was involved in that incident, decided, I'm just going to casually slide up in front of the leaders. Carl Edwards would take advantage of all this chaos by moving up to 4th place, and he was on much fresher tires than the 88, the 15, and the 47. Carl Edwards understood that he needed to make overly aggressive moves to stay out of trouble. Sounds like an oxymoron, right? Well, in many situations where you're dealing with lap cars, sometimes you have to go 3 wide, make daring moves to where you're not stuck behind a lap car and get into future trouble. In terms of a 3rd place battle with Bobby Labonte, he would pull the on the 2000 champion and take that spot. A few laps later, Carl Edwards would work his way past Dale Earnhardt Jr., who was honestly just looking for a solid point stay to stop the bleeding. On lap 177, Carl Edwards would get past Clint Bowyer, but not in the way that you think. Much like that 17-year-old rich kid that inherits a Lamborghini and a mansion to do TikTok videos, Carl Edwards would inherit the lead from Clint Bowyer after he would run into some trouble getting through lap traffic.
Oh, he got touched. Got turned around. The race leader. Caution. Can they all avoid him? No.
And just like that, Clint Bowyer, one of the most consistent short track racers since he joined MWR in 2012, was now well out of the picture, at least for now. Carl Edwards would come down pit road with a common theme throughout the night that he was smoking the left rear. The team was extremely worried about Carl Edwards using up those left side tires, and so because of that, Carl Edwards got 4 Mr. Feelgoods, and he would get a half a round chassis adjustment. To no surprise, the BK Racing cars would struggle on this night, and yet again on lap 209 we would have a restart. Carl Edwards would get past the 11 for the lead. However, NASCAR would give him a warning. They did not necessarily like that restart. Still, it was simply a warning, and Carl Edwards was now back in the lead. At this point in the race, it seemed like the 2 drivers that were going to duke it out for the victory were Carl Edwards and his former teammate Matt Kenseth, who was the 2003 champion, back with a vengeance now at Joe Gibbs Racing. The 2 would end up having to negotiate with lap traffic, and as Alan Bestwick said, it had to have been aggravating to race at Bristol, especially with all the traffic. You can almost compare this like trying to get through New York or Los Angeles on the highway, because you just have to pick the right lane, hope that it goes forward, and in this case, Carl Edwards tried to pass Danica Patrick, and he would get burned horribly. Matt Kenseth would end up passing Carl Edwards for the lead on lap 236, and Carl Edwards ultimately would just have to simply follow him past Danica Patrick, now in the second place. Then a couple laps later, Carl Edwards could have easily raced Matt Kenseth aggressive now that he was having problems of his own with the 36 and the 40. However, like the respectful racer he is, Carl Edwards would catch Matt Kenseth a break. Man, I miss the days, honestly, when there was some type of driver etiquette. Because I guarantee you, in 2023, you're getting door slammed for doing this. With 243 laps to go, there would be a caution for debris, and so it was a much needed reset, especially for Carl Edwards, who was really struggling on that longer run. Carl Edwards knew that he needed to be tightened up, so the track bar went half around and the number 99 got 4 tires. Meanwhile, for Matt Kenseth, he would get 1 round on the right rear. Because Carl Edwards took 4 tires, he would lose some spots, but fortunately he was 6th on the outside, and Matt Kenseth on that sequence would get busted for speeding. Because of upper groove supremacy, we got a bit of train racing, and it was awfully hard to get back up to the lead. But for a fast Ford Fusion like Carl Edwards had on that night, it took really in no time for Carl Edwards to pass Kyle Busch for second and then chase down Paul Menard and take the lead. Carl Edwards at this point was on cruise control because his number 1 competitor Matt Kenseth was having problems getting through traffic to where he had to on drivers back in the late 20s. At this point, what was his competition really? Juan Pablo Montoya, a driver that hadn't even won on an oval? Paul Menard, NASCAR's Mendoza line, a driver that is just so average? Jeff Gordon? Because, I mean, come on, are we going to really delude ourselves into thinking that this is the old Jeff Gordon and he's back with a vengeance, especially after the last 2 weeks? Because, in the words of Nicole Briscoe,
I don't think he has it. I think he's looking a little down in the dumps lately.
If anything, this was now a battle of machine versus the surface, because all night Carl Edwards was told to be very careful on the left side tires. Plus, with all these cautions, yet again, we have teams trying to get the track position. Carl Edwards for the restart on lap 342 would be on the inside. However, yet again, Carl Edwards would end up taking the lead and on his competition. Well, ultimately, Matt Kenseth would end up being the veteran driver he is, finding a way to get back into the mix. And after a vigorous battle for the lead on lap 375, Matt Kenseth would pass Carl Edwards. And this was a critical pass because on that same lap, there would be yet another caution, this time for Jeff Burton spinning out. Carl Edwards would need to be a gladiator on this restart to try to pry this win away from the 2003 champion. Unfortunately, you remember when I said that this was going to be a testament of machine versus the surface? For Carl Edwards, the vigorous concrete surface of Bristol did a number on the equipment, most notably the engine of the number 99. Before the restart on lap 383, Carl Edwards reported he was having issues, and at this point, he would do his best job to try to get out of the way and not cause any more havoc on this restart. As Carl Edwards spent the next couple laps fading down the running order, he wondered whether he should keep running until it blew up or try to bring it to him to resolve the issue. This would be where the mixed signals came into place because the engine tuner told him to keep going. However, eventually, Carl Edwards would be told to take it behind the wall and try to diagnose the problem. As Carl Edwards climbed out of the race car, his chances to win the 2013 Bristol Night Race were over. The diagnosis would be that the 99 suffered from a valve spring issue, and that would officially end their night, which was an interesting thing to happen for 2 reasons. Number 1, this was the first Roush DNF of the entire season. Number 2, it was a bit odd to have a valve spring issue at a track like Bristol where the RPM range is up and down. Then you have to consider that they took gear away from the spring race to the summer race here at Bristol, and that meant that there were, of course, less RPMs. For a track like Bristol, 30% of the time you're off throttle, and so it was odd that Carl Edwards would have such an engine failure at a place like Bristol. As Carl Edwards was interviewed, he was pretty chill. He said there was no warning to the engine failing, and in typical Carl Edwards fashion, he found the positives. He went out and said this was the most fun he had in a race car in a long time. Plus, for Carl Edwards and Jimmy Fennig, this was a statement race. The 99 was far and away the dominant car. This gave them a lot of momentum, and it gave them a potential setup to use at Dover, considering how similar the two are, being concrete racetracks. Still, for Carl Edwards, being concrete Carl, having a dominant car in this race, one that was almost untouchable besides the various times where guys would try to stay out and get the track position, it was for sure a bit frustrating to come up short of a third victory in the Bristol Night Race. So if you guys enjoyed this video, let's continue the 2013 trend. Check out how Marcos Ambrose lost the 2013 Watkins Glen race, or find out how a restart ended up derailing Jimmy Johnson from dominating Dover yet again in 2013. Other than that, this is Nathan for Digital Gashouse. Life's a beach, and then you drive.